I've made a lot of videos talking about my experience on HRT. There's one video in particular called The Monster That I Became on Hormones. And I think there's a unique balancing act that I had to undergo in order to seem like I was convinced of being transgender by just lying through my teeth to just about everybody I was talking to with a pre-made constructed narrative that fit that very particular conception of me. I had to speak like this to people constantly, and it was difficult to maintain character at all times, but I was able to, and in so doing, it ended up being at a great cost to my overall mental health. Because as I attempted to say in that video, lying is coercive in nature. It doesn't stop just at the lie. The lie is bad enough, but in the process, it ends up corrupting every part of you. It ends up making you feel worse because it isolates you, and due to the fact that it's isolating you, you end up feeling alienated from everyone around you. So even though there are people there, you can't connect with them, only furthering the feeling of isolation that you feel. It also creates a strange parallel between your experience and what you know to be true. So you have this strange disconnection with what you're always saying and what you're actually thinking. And this is going to make you feel worse over time because that's a lot to focus on, and you're really overexerting your brain by maintaining that disconnect. And I think this had a number of consequences for me because people who are depressed tend to become really impulsive. Like, I went from improving steadily on my mental health before I did the whole transgender thing to just going fucking insane because I was trying to fundamentally restructure myself in order to, if you don't know what this term means, transmax, basically to try to maximize the effects of the HRT and everything else in order to become the most transgender I could possibly be in order to manipulate some wealthy man into taking care of me forever. And so that was that. That's what I was doing. And it made me absolutely miserable. It's like I took all of the progress that I made on controlling myself, on seeing things in perspective, in a nuanced way rather than in black and white, on being able to recognize the transient nature of emotions, on being able to make decisive decisions and stick with them. I improved in a number of ways. Now, of course, there was a long way for me to go, but I improved in a number of ways right before I did the whole transgender thing. And so I did it. And at first, I was able to maintain some of the progress that I had made. But the longer I had to lie, and the more alone I felt around other people, the more I would feel myself becoming more and more depressed until I just wanted to kill myself constantly. And I felt like there was no one in the world who would truly know that I was suffering and just how much, because there was no one in the world who knew who I even was. And it was at this point that I saw myself becoming more and more impulsive, that I saw myself viewing things in a much more black and white way, becoming much more indecisive, because the things I was calculating were not whether or not I wanted something. The things I was calculating were, how does this affect my image? How does this affect the broader perception of me within this narrative that I've constructed? What can I do to maximize my future and the outcome of this transmaxing thing? I was considering all of these auxiliary external things that actually had nothing really to do with me or what I wanted. That's what came last, because I decided long ago that what I wanted was not going to be a part of the picture. It was going to be what other people wanted of me, or what I wanted to do to maintain this fake person that I had built for everybody else. Well, in particular for perpetuating my own existence, which required doing things for everybody else, because I was convinced that there was no other path forward for me. And you stop thinking rationally about yourself when you're at this point, when you're making all of these other considerations. And that's exactly what happened to me. I became incredibly irrational with how I would spend my money, with how I would plan out my future, with how I would do just about anything. Like, I ended up following my first and most extreme impulse all the time. Even when I tried to manage them, it felt impossible because I was so suicidal that it was like, well, if I do this differently, why does it matter? Why does it matter how I do things differently? Why does it matter what I do? Because I'm going to kill myself anyways. In fact, maybe this will be the thing that leads me to killing myself, the thing that I desperately want to do due to all of this lying, these hormones that do not match the person that I want to present as, that are actively making me dysphoric. I want to kill myself. And so, if that's what I want to do, then why don't I just cause as much havoc and mayhem until finally something pushes me to do just that? But what I said in that video, and this is the thing that ultimately got me to detransition, was this notion that if I'm going to kill myself anyway, why don't I do a social suicide? Why don't I push everybody away by finally being honest, just shamelessly honest, no matter what I've said prior? And I did push a lot of people away in that process, but that's quote-unquote social suicide that I did in the midst of a possible actual suicide ended up being the thing that saved my life. Because I think I would have just kept digging my hole deeper and deeper and deeper if I stayed on those hormones until ultimately I lied in it. And thank God I didn't do that. Thank God I made that decision to detransition and to finally come clean with everyone, even though it was at the cost of me having those, ultimately, people who weren't real friends, that losing those people. But honestly, I wish I did that way earlier, like a year earlier. Because the cost of me not doing that was a number of decisions that I would have never, and I mean never, made if I hadn't gone down that road where I ended up essentially having an extended mental health crisis. I mean, that's really what it was. Like, there was over a year where I was getting worse and worse and worse mentally, becoming a worse person in terms of how I treated just about everybody, in terms of how I behaved. I ended up seeing reality in a less clear and rational way. A lot of the progress I made in the past went away, and I was more suicidal than I ever was. That year, where I was on those hormones, was the worst, by far, the worst year of my life. And it destroyed me. I mean, even prior to getting on them, just identifying as that person who I knew I was not, destroyed me. And what do when you're that suicidal? You behave badly. You do things that you're not supposed to do. You do things you know you're not supposed to do, with the hope that maybe one of these things will be the thing that drives everybody away, that kills you. And that's what I kept trying to lead to, because it really felt like I didn't care what happened to me. And I didn't understand exactly why or what was going on. I thought maybe I was like that all along, and that suddenly it just culminated into its final stage. But at the same time, I had another consideration on my mind, and this was the one that I couldn't talk to anyone about. And so I kind of knew. I thought maybe it's all these lies. Maybe the lies are the reason why I'm experiencing this. And I was never able to delve into it too deeply because I didn't have anyone that I could do that with. But that's how it felt to me. And in retrospect, that impulse that I had, that it was, the lies causing the problem, that impulse was correct. And now I don't lie like that anymore. I don't lie at all. I've been able to train myself to be honest and break that bad habit that lasted so long, like that really plagued me for basically my whole life. I was able to fix it by each and every time I was speaking to someone and I considered lying, I stopped for a moment. I stopped myself in my tracks and recognized what I was doing. And I thought for just a couple seconds, do I want to say this or do I want to tell the truth? And I would tell the truth. And that's how I fixed the problem. I for one, developed a habit of stopping myself each and every time I had that impulse, and then choosing to say the right thing until eventually saying the right thing became my basic impulse. But I do notice certain habits that I developed specifically at that time, that very suicidal period of my life, very impulsive, very chaotic period of my life. I noticed certain habits or tendencies that I developed at that time and at no other time that have been somewhat difficult to shed myself of, but I've been steadily doing so as well. In particular, the way that I would respond to certain feelings. Like, I would get a negative feeling, and then I would just keep thinking about it until I spiraled further and further down, and then did something really impulsive in response to it. And that was like a learned behavior that I ended up developing that I didn't really have prior to that. And now what I do is when I feel something bad, I don't let the thoughts that stem from those feelings consume me. I spend a moment to think, and I try to put it all in context. What is this in the context of tomorrow or the day after or the day before? And in the context of the perspectives of other people and the things that I've learned, in situations that I've had in the past that are analogous to this one. Let's try to make sense of this. And once I've calmed down and I don't fall down that rabbit hole of more and more negative thoughts, I'm able to parse this and piece it together in a way that makes sense. And that whole process of thinking about it actually calms me down as well. And then I'm able to take decisive action and make the right decision for my future and for my current self. And then I feel a lot better after I do that. But it requires stepping in and stemming the flow of negative information, of negativity that begins to plague my mind in response to that situation. And then in response to that situation, applying this nuanced line of criticism of myself and of the situation, and then trying to live by whatever conclusion ultimately bears out from that, which is going to be one a lot more neutral than the hot-headed intensity that I may have initially responded with if I let myself fall down that emotional rabbit hole. This helps a whole lot. And the more you do it, the easier it gets, and the better you are going to be at self-control. And that's the thing, is that I developed this habit during that time where I was pretending to be this other person, of just straight up not acknowledging my feelings. And that refusal to acknowledge them and to instead push them down ended up leading to all of my feelings being experienced with far, far greater intensity. And then me being left with my fucking pants down, having no idea how to respond to any of this stuff, because I was just trying my best not to think about it. Because if I thought about it, I'd have to think about the lies I was telling. I'd have to think about the Patrick Bateman-esque construction that I created for the world around me. But now what do? I actively consider and acknowledge my feelings and the thoughts that stem from them, and I try to control myself by acknowledging those things and coming up with a plan of action for how I can calm down and how I can approach the situation in the most rational and moral way, in a way that will lead to me feeling better. Because that should have been the goal all along. The goal should have been, how am I going to feel the best I can? How am I going to do the right thing for those around me, which is incidentally also probably going to be the thing that is the best for me. I wasn't taking all these things into consideration. I was trying to perpetuate this lie, and that's not good. That's not going to be how you be a happy person. That's going to be how you're a miserable person. And I was a miserable person. I was an incredibly miserable person when that was my only consideration. But now, through applying these techniques to address my impulses, address my thoughts, I'm able to exert so much more control over myself. It's like night and day, the way that I behave now versus the way that I behaved then. And I cannot emphasize enough how thankful I am to the people who stuck by me during that really difficult time where I initially detransitioned and was having to work through all of these thoughts and habits that I developed during that awful time. And I also, with hindsight now, cannot be more thankful that I just finally bit the bullet and made that decision to detransition and to be who I actually was all along. Because if I hadn't have done that, then I probably wouldn't be alive today. Probably not. Thank God. Thank fucking God that I stopped with that nonsense. And now I'm able to respond to my emotions so well that I'm able to be in a caring, mature, and happy relationship. I'm able to be a good partner to someone else, not just to myself, because at my core, I don't need somebody else. I'm able to be independent, and I'm also able to encourage her to be independent. But I'm able to be that person who I am, independent of her, with her. And in that sense, it creates a far stronger unit, because both of us are capable of being independent of each other. And in that sense, I've come to develop a self. There were times in the past when I was on those hormones and when I was behaving like that where it almost felt like I didn't have a self because I lied so much. And the person I was pretending to be was so diametrically opposed to who I actually was that dissonance, that disconnect that was created, felt like it could only result in suicide or in destroying everything I had, because I didn't want to be alive as that person. And now it's like seeing the person I am now with just a few vestiges left of who I used to be that I'm quickly working to address and remove. Seeing who I am now, it's like night and day. It's insane the amount of progress I've been able to make. I don't know any other word to use than insane or extraordinary. That just by making these changes and addressing the problems in my thinking, I've been able to become so much more happy and independent, and I'm able to actually love somebody the way that I'm supposed to, the way that they need, the way that I want to. When in the past, I wasn't able to love anybody. Well, I might have said that I did. Really, that was just infatuation or obsession. Now I'm able to actually do so. And I can't believe how much has changed just through these simple changes in my thinking and my behavior and actually being honest with people. I think if I continue on this trajectory and I continue exercising self-control and thinking of things in a rational way, being honest with those around me, I'm going to have a great life ultimately.